It started off just like any other night. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, while Emma was in the kitchen, pretending to make dinner. I didn't think much of it at first. The silence between us had become so familiar over the past few months, it almost felt like it was a part of the furniture. Emma had been distant lately, always finding excuses to stay out late, or take trips that just happened to come up. I'd heard her mention this old college friend a few times. Jake, I think his name was. He seemed to pop up whenever she was heading out for a night away. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. Maybe it was just me being insecure, overthinking every little thing. After all, she was my wife. We'd been together for years, built a life together. I had no reason to doubt her. Or so I told myself. But then, little things started to creep up, like the constant checking of her phone. The way she'd keep it face down, or lock it with a passcode when she never used to bother. The late-night phone calls that ended the moment I walked into the room. I'd ask her about it, but she'd laugh it off. Just work stuff, she'd say, her voice almost too casual. But deep down I knew. The silence in our house was no longer just a lack of noise. It was a tension, a gap between us that kept growing wider with each passing day. I could feel it in the way she looked at me sometimes, like I wasn't even there. It was the night she came home late again that finally broke me. She walked in around 10:30, her face flushed like she'd been running around. She told me she'd been out with the girls, but her eyes were too shifty, her smile too forced. I decided it was time to do something. I wasn't going to just sit around, pretending everything was fine. This time, I had to know for sure. When she headed to the bathroom to take a shower, I made my move. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed her phone off the counter. My heart was pounding in my chest as I unlocked it. She never bothered with a passcode, and I was already too far gone to second-guess myself. I opened her messages, praying, no, hoping, I wouldn't find anything. But there it was, plain as day. Jake. Texts, pictures, and plans. Nothing explicit, but it was enough. Enough to make my stomach twist. Enough to make my hands shake. I couldn't confront her then and there. I needed more. This couldn't just be a gut feeling. I needed something real, something undeniable. That night, I made a decision. I was going to get proof. Real, hard proof. And then, I'd make her see the truth. I wouldn't wait around for her to admit it. No, this time I was in control. The next few days felt like a cruel game. Emma went about her usual routine, leaving for nights out with her friends, and brushing off any questions I had with the same rehearsed excuses. I couldn't ignore it anymore though. The feeling in the pit of my stomach, the tightening knot in my chest, told me it was time to act. I rented an Airbnb on the outskirts of town, setting up hidden cameras with the kind of precision I'd never thought I was capable of. This wasn't just about confronting her. I wanted to see her lies laid bare. I wasn't going to let her get away with it anymore, and I needed more than just the texts. I needed to witness everything. The night she told me she was meeting friends again, I pretended like I didn't know any better. I watched her leave, smiling as if everything was fine, and the moment her car was out of sight, I grabbed my things and headed out. I didn't want to rush. I didn't want her to suspect anything. The Airbnb was small, but perfect for what I had planned. I set up the cameras, waited for the inevitable. It felt wrong, watching her without her knowing, but I couldn't stop myself. I was already too deep into it, and I needed to see what had been happening behind my back for all this time. Hours passed, the clock ticking by slowly. I had to remind myself to breathe as I watched Emma's phone light up with messages. She grinned like a teenager at a first date. Jake. His name was everywhere, and every time she smiled at her phone, it felt like a stab to my chest. Then he showed up. Jake. Walking in like he owned the place, bottle of wine in hand. The familiar cocky grin on his face made me sick. He was exactly what I expected. Too confident, too sure of himself. Emma greeted him at the door, and there it was, the kiss. The kiss that destroyed every bit of trust one had left in her. The way she melted into it, laughing like she hadn't just torn apart everything we'd built. My stomach turned. They moved upstairs, completely unaware of the cameras capturing their every move. I could hear their laughter, but it felt like a distant echo, like I was hearing it from underwater. The betrayal hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking as I tried to hold it together. The anger was rising, building, and I knew there was no going back now. I wasn't just a man with a suspicion. I was a man who had seen it all, and now I was going to make sure they felt the full weight of it. I sat in my car for what felt like hours after I saw everything unfold. My mind raced, replaying the kiss, the way they laughed, the way she looked at him. Every ounce of trust I'd ever had in her shattered in that moment. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I drove to the Airbnb, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The air in my lungs felt thin, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Every mile felt like a lifetime. My hands were still shaking as I parked a block away, keeping my distance. I didn't want to rush this. I moved quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I crept through the back door, I could hear them upstairs, their voices muffled by the walls, but I knew what was happening. I could already feel the anger boiling over. I took the stairs 2 at a time, breathing deep, trying to stay calm. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough for me to hear them clearly. I could hear the bed creak, then a soft laugh, then more whispers. I pushed the door open slowly. There they were, Emma, frozen in shock, her eyes wide as she looked up at me, and Jake, standing there, trying to act unfazed but looking like a deer caught in headlights. He stood up too quickly, probably ready to get in my face, but I wasn't having it. "You're in my bed," I said, keeping my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. Jake tried to step forward, puffing out his chest like he could intimidate me, but before he could even make a move, I pulled the taser from my pocket and hit him in the chest. The shock was instant. His body went rigid, his face twisting with pain, and he collapsed to the floor, twitching. I didn't let up. I pressed the taser deeper into his chest, making sure he felt every second of it. The room smelled of desperation and fear, but I wasn't done yet. I turned to Emma, my voice cold, cutting through the air. "You've got the nerve to look surprised? You've lost everything." Her face fell. The guilt, the regret, it was all there, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I didn't need to say more. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the room, leaving them in the aftermath of their own choices. I slipped out the back door, not looking back, but it was far from over. The next morning, I couldn't shake the images from last night. Emma's wide eyes, Jake's body spasming on the floor, the sharp electricity of the taser still buzzing in my hands. The adrenaline had worn off, but the anger, no, the satisfaction, stayed with me. I hadn't just caught them. I'd made them feel it. I didn't go back home immediately. I needed time to breathe, to calm down. But I wasn't finished yet. No, I had one more thing to do, something I knew would make Jake never forget the night he crossed me. I drove to the Airbnb parking lot and sat there for a while, just staring at the wrecked, twisted car Jake had left behind. He had no idea what was coming. He'd already lost. His pride, his comfort, everything he thought he was entitled to, it was all slipping away. I walked up to the car slowly, making sure no one was around. I'd been watching that damn thing for weeks now. It had been parked in front of their house, looking so smug, like it was his territory. I wasn't going to just let that slide. I took a deep breath and pulled my keys from my pocket. One slow, deliberate stroke of the blade down the side of the car. Deep gouges. Sharp lines. A reminder of what he'd done to me, to us. Each scratch was a little victory, but I wasn't satisfied yet. I stood there, staring at the damage I'd done, and waited. I wanted him to see it, wanted him to understand the full weight of what I had just taken from him. About an hour later, I saw Jake stumbling out of the front door. He was groggy, probably still reeling from the shock of last night. He walked toward his car, no clue about what had just happened to it. I watched him for a second, the satisfaction of what I'd done settling in. Then, as he reached for the door handle, I hit the gas. The sound of metal crumpling against metal was like music to my ears. His car slammed into mine with a sickening crunch, and I watched as Jake stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. He didn't even know what hit him. I parked my car, stepped out, and walked over to him. He was struggling to get to his feet, rage flashing across his face. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, but his voice was shaky, full of confusion and fury. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was the smile of someone who didn't care anymore. "You'll remember this day, Jake. Not for the reasons you think." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, leaving him there in the wreckage of his car, his pride, and his twisted little world. The days that followed were quiet. Almost too quiet. I didn't rush home, didn't check in with Emma. I knew what was coming, and part of me wanted to savor the silence, the stillness that hung in the air. Jake was nowhere to be seen, and Emma, well, she was frantic. I could tell. The calls started coming in the morning after the car incident. She called twice, then texted, but I didn't pick up. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her world was already starting to fall apart, and I was letting it unravel without lifting a finger. By the third day, I could almost feel her guilt through the phone. She left voicemail after voicemail, the panic in her voice growing more evident with every one. She begged me to come back. She apologized, saying she made a mistake, that she loved me, that she was confused. I didn't care. I wanted her to stew in the mess she'd created. I wanted her to feel what it was like to watch everything slip through your fingers. And it wasn't just Emma. Jake's little world was collapsing too. Word about his wrecked car spread fast, and he wasn't handling it well. I could only imagine the embarrassment, the phone calls from his friends asking if he was okay, probably wondering how he'd managed to crash a car he thought was invincible. But I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't made any public accusations. I didn't need to. The damage was already done, and the people in his life, the people who mattered, were starting to notice. It was beautiful in a way, watching them both squirm without me lifting a finger. Emma couldn't hide the guilt anymore. Every time I saw her, whether it was in the hallway or passing by her at work, she couldn't look me in the eye. It was like she was a child caught red-handed, trying to dodge the consequences. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little bit. The best part was how quiet things had become. She'd given up trying to explain herself. There were no more excuses, no more defenses. Just the quiet hum of her regret. I knew Emma was going to try again. I could feel it coming. That one last attempt to fix things, to undo the damage. She didn't have a choice. She had to try. I was right. It came a few days later. It happened sooner than I expected. Emma showed up at the door, her face a mixture of desperation and guilt. She didn't even knock, she just opened it slowly, like she wasn't sure if I would let her in. I stood there, watching her hesitate. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept in days. It almost felt pathetic. There she was, the woman who had betrayed me, now standing at my doorstep, broken. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, taking in the sight of her standing there, expecting me to fix it. I had to fight the urge to laugh. Fix it? She had destroyed it. "You've got some nerve, don't you?" I finally said. My voice wasn't angry, just cold. So cold. Her eyes flickered with panic. "I'm so sorry," she began, her voice shaky. "I was stupid. I don't know what happened, it just happened, and it was a mistake. It was all a mistake, and I regret it. I'm sorry." I didn't even flinch at her words. She'd said that before, back when I first caught her in the lie about Jake. The apology was the same, like some script she'd memorized. But it didn't reach me anymore. She didn't reach me anymore. "You regret it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to make it better? You slept with him, Emma. You tore our marriage apart. And now you regret it? After all this time?" Her face twisted in pain, like she couldn't believe I was saying this to her. She took a step closer, her hands trembling. "I love you," she said. "Please, don't throw everything away." It wasn't real with him. It was just a moment of weakness. It meant nothing. I didn't say anything right away. I could see the way she was trying to claw her way back into my life, trying to talk her way out of the hole she'd dug. But the words felt empty. She was lying to herself as much as she was lying to me. I stepped back, blocking her path as she tried to move closer. "You don't get to just undo it, Emma," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You can't just make this go away with an apology. You made your choice. And now you have to live with it." Her face crumpled, like I had just slapped her. "Please," she begged, the tears starting to fall. "I'm begging you. Please, don't do this. I'll fix it. I swear." But there was nothing to fix. Not anymore. I stood there, watching her cry, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I wasn't moved. Not one bit. I'd given her everything. My trust, my love, my patience. And she'd thrown it all away for a fleeting moment with someone else. Now, she wanted me to fix it? To make everything okay again? No. I stepped back again, a small laugh escaping my lips, bitter and cold. "You don't get to fix anything. Not after what you've done." She reached out, but I didn't even flinch. I was done. I didn't need her anymore. "Goodbye, Emma," I said, my voice steady, but the finality in it hit harder than any argument ever could. She stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. But I didn't care. I wasn't waiting around for her to get her act together. She left without another word. The door shut behind her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally felt peaceful. The next few weeks were strangely calm. It was like the storm had passed, but the damage was still everywhere, just lying under the surface, waiting to bubble up. I didn't hear much from Emma after she left that day. No more desperate texts, no more apologies. It was like she had finally accepted what had happened. But I knew she wouldn't just walk away that easily. She was still trying to make sense of everything, still trying to find a way to fix what she'd destroyed, even if she didn't know how. One afternoon, I bumped into her at the grocery store. I hadn't been expecting it. There she was, standing in front of the produce section, her eyes flicking to me before she quickly turned her head away. She looked different, smaller somehow. There was no cocky smile, no confident air about her. She looked like someone who had just realized that the life they thought they had was never really theirs to begin with. I could feel her hesitation. She was about to turn and walk away, but then she stopped. I watched her inhale like she was gathering courage, then slowly walked toward me. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet. I nodded, my eyes scanning the shelves, not really wanting to engage but not able to just leave. She was still my wife, after all, even if that felt like someone else's reality. "Look, I've been thinking about everything," she said, her voice small, almost pleading. "I know I messed up. I know what I did, and I hate myself for it. I want to fix it, if you'll let me." I didn't even look at her. Instead, I grabbed a bag of apples, pretending not to hear the desperation in her voice. "You can't fix this, Emma. Not anymore. You broke it. You can't just go back and glue everything together with a few sorry words." I could hear her breath catch, and I knew she was trying to hold it together, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. She had made her choice, and now I had made mine. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I continued, the words coming out sharper than I intended. But they needed to be said. "You let someone else into our life, into our marriage, and you think a couple of apologies will change anything?" She flinched, like I had slapped her, but I didn't feel sorry. She stood there for a long moment, just looking at me like she was waiting for me to say something else. But I had nothing more to say. Nothing that would make her feel better. Nothing that would make me feel better. "I'm sorry," she said again, almost a whisper, but it didn't reach me this time. I walked away without another word, without even looking back. And as I pushed my cart toward the checkout, I realized something. It wasn't just her I was leaving behind. It was me too. I had spent so much time being angry, being betrayed, that I'd forgotten who I was before all this. I wasn't that guy anymore. The guy who believed in second chances, the guy who put up with lies and excuses. That guy was gone. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. It had been over a month since that conversation at the grocery store. After that, Emma stopped reaching out. I think she finally understood that I wasn't coming back. She'd realized her actions had consequences, but the tension between us was still there. She was stuck in her guilt, and I was free. I didn't expect to feel peace, but that's what I found. No more lies, no more wondering what she was up to. It was quiet, Underwhelming, even, but it was real. Then came the email. It was a Tuesday morning when I saw the notification. I didn't want to open it, didn't want to give her the chance to pull me back in, but something pushed me to, and I clicked. The email was a confession. She laid it all out, how the affair with Jake started, how it made her feel alive again, how sorry she was for hurting me. And then that last line, "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to feel alive again." That hit harder than anything she'd said before. She wasn't sorry for us, for what she'd broken. She was sorry for herself. Her own emptiness was what drove her, not love, not the marriage we built. It was selfish. I stared at the screen for a while, thinking about replying, telling her it was over, that I'd never take her back, but what was the point? Instead, I deleted the email. There was nothing left to say. Later that day, I ran into Jake. It wasn't planned, but seeing him made everything feel like it had come full circle. He was outside a cafe, scanning the crowd, and when he saw me, he stiffened, like he didn't know whether to act tough or sheepish. He tried to say something, but I cut him off, leaning in just enough so he could hear me clearly. "You're the one who has to live with this, Jake. Every time you look in the mirror, you'll remember the guy who lost everything for a stupid decision." His face turned red. He opened his mouth, probably to make some smart remark, but I didn't let him. "Just remember who's been hurt here. And when you're alone at night, remember who's sitting in the wreckage of your choices." I didn't wait for his response. I just walked away, feeling oddly detached. I wasn't angry anymore, and I sure as hell wasn't going to waste any more energy on him. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd taken back control. And now, it was over. A few days passed after running into Jake, and I didn't hear from Emma again. It was like she finally got the message. It's over. She stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped leaving those half-hearted voicemails that made my blood boil. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or if it just felt empty. But either way, I knew it was for the best. The more time passed, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about me, too. I'd been living in that relationship, that lie, for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what she was doing or who she was with. It was just me. It felt strange at first, like I was floating in this limbo where nothing felt familiar anymore. But slowly, I started to feel grounded again. Work became a distraction. The day-to-day stuff that used to feel like just a way to kill time started to matter again. I didn't feel like I was just existing. I was living. But then, a week later, I got a text from Emma. It was short, just a couple of words. "We need to talk." I didn't even bother responding right away. I knew what she was going to say. She was going to try and patch things up, give me more apologies, tell me how sorry she was for everything. But I wasn't in the mood to listen. The next day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She knocked once, then opened the door slowly, like she wasn't sure if I'd let her in. I didn't make her wait long. I just stepped aside and let her in. "I'm sorry, okay," she said, almost before she was fully through the door. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to hear me out." I didn't say anything. I just watched her, waiting for the words to come. "I've been thinking a lot," she went on, "about what I did, and what I didn't do. I didn't think about you, I didn't think about us, and I never should have let it go that far. I was selfish. I know that. But I can't stand the idea of losing you forever." Her words were just noise. I'd heard them before, too many times. But the one thing she didn't seem to get was that it wasn't just about forgiveness. It wasn't about what she did, it was about why she did it. She wanted to fix everything, but she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything had been shattered. I took a deep breath, then finally spoke. "Emma, you don't get it," I said, my voice steady but firm. "This isn't about you being sorry. This isn't about fixing things. You broke this, and you have to live with that. I have to live with that. But you'll always remember the day you chose him over us. You'll always carry that. That's the real punishment." She stood there, her face falling as I said the words I knew she didn't want to hear. But it wasn't just punishment I was talking about. It was the truth. The silence between us stretched on, but I knew there was nothing left to say. She left without another word. And this time, I didn't feel anything. Not anger. Not regret. Just nothing. And for once, it felt like freedom. The days after Emma's last visit passed quietly, almost eerily so. For once, there were no calls, no texts, no desperate attempts to claw her way back into my life. At first, I felt a strange sort of relief. But relief slowly gave way to something I hadn't expected. Clarity. It wasn't just Emma I was letting go of, it was the entire person I'd been while I was with her. The man who forgave too easily. The man who ignored his instincts, dismissed the little signs, and let himself believe in something that was never truly there. I wasn't that man anymore. And honestly, I didn't want to be him again. One evening, as I was sorting through some old photos, I came across a picture of us from years ago. We were on vacation, smiling in front of a sunset. I almost didn't recognize the couple in the photo. They looked happy, content. And for a moment, I felt the familiar pang of loss. Not for Emma, but for the life I thought we had. I put the photo down and stared at it for a long time. It was a reminder that not everything was a lie. There had been good times. There had been love. But the past didn't change the present. What she'd done, the choices she'd made, those were unforgivable. And I couldn't keep looking back, trying to piece together a broken picture. That weekend, I boxed up everything that reminded me of her. The pictures, the notes, even the little trinkets we'd collected over the years. I drove out to a storage unit and left it all there, locked away where it couldn't haunt me anymore. It felt like closing a door I should have shut a long time ago. It wasn't easy though. Letting go rarely is. There were still nights when the anger bubbled up, when the betrayal felt fresh all over again. But each day, it got a little easier. Each day, I felt a little lighter. I wasn't sure where my life was heading now, but one thing was certain. It wasn't going to include Emma. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't fill me with sadness. It filled me with hope. A few months passed, and everything started to feel like it was settling into a new rhythm. The anger from everything that had happened still lingered in my chest, but it wasn't as sharp anymore. It had dulled, turned into something more manageable, like a scar that still itched every now and then but no longer bled. I focused on my work. I threw myself into it, and for the first time in years, I actually felt like I was making progress. It wasn't just the work itself, it was the feeling of control. I wasn't at the mercy of Emma's moods or her decisions anymore. My life was my own, and I had forgotten what that felt like. For once, I had space to breathe, to think, to build something just for me. I started making plans. Not for Emma to come back. Not for us, but for me. I joined a gym. I started reading more, catching up on books I hadn't had the time for. I started taking weekend trips, sometimes to the beach, sometimes to the mountains, just to get away from everything, to clear my mind. The kids, of course, were the biggest part of my life. I stayed involved, taking them to school events, helping with homework, picking them up from soccer practice. They were growing up so fast. And while they were still too young to fully understand what had happened between me and Emma, I tried to shield them from it as best as I could. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I decided to stop by a bar that I used to frequent back when things with Emma were easier. It was a local spot, nothing fancy, just a place to grab a drink and unwind. I hadn't been in months, but tonight, something pulled me there. When I walked in, I didn't recognize anyone at first. But then, sitting at the bar, I saw a familiar face. It was Laura, an old acquaintance from college. We hadn't talked in years, but she looked the same, maybe a little older, but still radiant. She smiled when she saw me. "Andrew," she said, her voice warm. "It's been a long time." We caught up for a bit, and I was surprised how easy it was to talk to her. It wasn't just the nostalgia of old college memories. It was the way she listened, the way she laughed at my stupid jokes. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of connection. After a while, she invited me to join her and her friends at a table. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for anything like that yet, but something about her presence felt so easy, so natural, that I agreed. As the night went on, I realized that I had been holding on to something for so long, this idea of a perfect life with Emma, that I hadn't allowed myself to feel anything else. But sitting there with Laura, laughing, enjoying the simple pleasure of company, I felt something new. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. A possibility. We exchanged numbers before we left, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe not for a relationship, at least not yet, but for something more than just surviving. Something more than just holding on to the past. As I walked home that night, I thought about how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person I was when Emma left. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe, just maybe, I was ready to move on. Not to forget, but to live again. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking more about Laura. Not in some obsessive way, but enough to make me realize that, maybe, I was finally ready to open up again. It wasn't just about her. It was about me being willing to let someone in, even if it was just as a friend at first. I'd spent so long locked in the past, fighting for a life that no longer existed, that I hadn't allowed myself the freedom to explore what might be out there. One Sunday afternoon, Laura invited me to a local art show. I almost turned her down. My comfort zone was still sitting at home with a beer in my hand, my thoughts revolving around work and the kids. But I remembered how easy it had been talking to her, and I didn't want to lose that connection just because I was afraid of what it might mean. The art show was small. Nothing like the stuffy galleries I imagined. It was vibrant, full of local artists, music, and enough energy to make me feel like I was part of something for the first time in a long while. Laura was there with a few friends, all of them animated and warm. We spent the afternoon walking around, chatting about art, life, and anything else that came to mind. I didn't feel like I had to be on guard the way I had been for so long. For the first time, I felt like I could just be myself. Do you ever miss it? Laura asked me as we stood in front of a painting that was meant to look like a chaotic swirl of colors. Miss what? Being happy. Being in love, I guess, she said, her eyes flicking toward me before returning to the painting. It wasn't a question I was expecting, and it made me pause. I miss being in love, I said slowly, feeling the weight of the words. But I'm not sure what that even means anymore. I spent so much time trying to fix something that was broken. I don't know if I remember what real love even feels like. She nodded thoughtfully, but didn't press further. There was a softness in her gaze, an understanding that told me she wasn't trying to push me. She just wanted me to feel safe enough to talk if I needed to. It was a simple moment, but it felt monumental. I wasn't rushing into anything, but I also wasn't closing myself off anymore. For the first time since Emma, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. As the weeks went by, I began spending more time with Laura. Nothing serious, just casual dates, dinners, and random hangouts. The more I got to know her, the more I realized how much I had missed having someone who could make me laugh, who could see me for who I really was, without the baggage of past mistakes. One night, we were walking through the park, enjoying the crisp fall air, and I found myself feeling nervous. Nervous in a way I hadn't felt in ages. Laura stopped walking and turned to face me, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "You've been distant lately," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "Is something going on?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say everything was fine, that I wasn't still carrying the weight of the past. But I didn't. I couldn't. "I don't know how to do this," I said quietly. "I don't know how to let someone in again." She didn't say anything for a moment, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. "It's okay to be scared. But you don't have to do it all at once. We can just take things slow, figure it out as we go." And that was it. That was the moment I realized that I was ready to try again, even if it was just small steps. I didn't have to rush into anything. There was no timeline, no pressure. Over the next few months, I allowed myself to keep opening up. I spent more time with Laura, and little by little, I started letting go of the fear that had held me back for so long. I wasn't trying to replace Emma. What we had was its own thing, its own chapter. But I was starting to understand that it wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about creating something new, something of my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living, not just surviving. A few months had passed since I started spending time with Laura, and I was beginning to feel something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Hope for my life, for my future, and maybe even for something more with Laura. But, as it always happens, the past had a way of catching up to me when I least expected it. One Saturday afternoon, while having lunch with Laura, I got a text that made my heart sink. It was from Emma. "Can we talk?" I felt the blood drain from my face. After months of silence, there she was, reaching out again. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the bubble I'd created with Laura intact. But another part knew it was inevitable. She wouldn't stay silent forever. I showed the text to Laura, who looked at me with concern but didn't say anything immediately. She was giving me space to figure out what to do, but I could tell she was waiting for me to take the lead. "I'll deal with it," I said, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't expecting this. It's like I've been living in this bubble, and now. "You don't have to respond right away," Laura said calmly. "You don't owe her anything. You decide when and if you're ready to talk. Whatever you choose, I'm here." I nodded, grateful for her support. It wasn't easy, but I knew I needed to handle this on my own terms. That night, I typed out a response. "I'm not sure what you want to talk about, but I'm not interested in reopening old wounds. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same." It was short and to the point, but it felt good. I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the past. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Emma. "I just need closure. Please. It's been months, and I need to know that we didn't end this because of something I did wrong." I stared at the message for a long time. Did she really think I owed her closure? My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed. "Emma, this is not about you or me anymore. This is about the life I'm building now. I don't need closure from you, and I don't want to keep talking about the past. This conversation is over." I hit send, then put the phone down. The relief was immediate, but I knew it wasn't over in my mind yet. But that night, I forced myself to let it go. The next morning, Laura and I went for a walk in the park. I told her about the text exchange, and she simply nodded. "I'm proud of you," she said. "It's not easy shutting that door, but you did. And you've made it clear that you're not letting her pull you back into her world." "I didn't realize how much I needed to do that until now," I said, feeling the weight lift slightly. "I can't keep holding on to the past. I need to look forward." "You're doing great," Laura said, squeezing my hand. "And you don't have to do this alone. I'm here." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, not just surviving. I had people who cared, who supported me. I was learning to trust again, not just in others but in myself. And for the first time, I truly believed I deserved happiness. After the conversation with Emma, everything felt lighter. I'd finally closed that door, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling the weight of the past on my chest. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And now, I felt like I was living again. Not just surviving, not just trying to make sense of the wreckage. Laura and I continued to spend time together, and slowly, I began to realize something I hadn't expected. I was ready for this. I was ready to let someone in, to build something real. We didn't rush anything. It wasn't about forcing a relationship, and it wasn't about erasing what I'd been through. It was about simply being with someone who didn't need me to be perfect, who understood the scars I was carrying and didn't judge me for them. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Laura looked at me, her smile soft. "I'm really glad we're doing this," she said, her voice almost hesitant. "I know you've been through a lot, and I'm not rushing you. But I think we're heading in the right direction." I smiled back, feeling something warm and genuine stir inside me. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Me too. I didn't think I'd get here. After everything that's happened, I didn't think I could ever feel this again." She leaned in and kissed me, gently, and I realized something then. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about taking each step forward, finding peace in the small moments, and trusting that the future was still mine to shape. The next morning, I received a text from Emma. I hesitated, not wanting to deal with it. But I opened it anyway. It was simple. "I hope you're doing okay. I'm really sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you find peace." I stared at the message for a while. It wasn't the apology I had waited for, and it didn't make me feel anything but tired. I didn't need her to make things right anymore. I'd already done that for myself. I typed back, "I am doing okay. Thank you for saying that. But it's over. I've moved on. And that was it. I hit send, put the phone down, and let it go. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the horizon. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval, not Emma's or anyone else's. I was moving forward, building something new. A week later, I sat on the porch with Laura, the evening air cool as we talked about our plans for the weekend. I was relaxed, at peace. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I was living my life, not just existing, and it felt good. I looked over at Laura, smiling. You know, I said, I didn't realize how much I needed this until now. To just be here. With you. She smiled back, reaching for my hand. I'm glad you're here, Andrew. I'm glad we're doing this too. And for the first time, I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and the future was something I could actually look forward to. No, it wasn't perfect. Life never was. But I wasn't going to waste time chasing something that was never meant to be. I had learned that the hard way. The future wasn't just about what I lost. It was about what I could still create. And with Laura by my side, I knew the next chapter of my life could be better than anything I had imagined. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out. And that was enough.